I think Hamas has every intention of surviving this war with Israel. And I think they may actually acquiesce in the formation of a technocratic government to govern Gaza because they know that such a government would be absolutely hostage, no pun intended, to their persuasions.
Aaron, so look, there's the Palestinian Authority ready to give way to a non-political administration, which looks like a move towards Israel. But do you think this idea is going to fly?
It's really complicated. And the closer the United States gets to the question of micromanaging Palestinian politics, the more resistance Palestinians are going to put up.
Yeah.
Mohammed Shtayyeh's resignation, I think, is the beginning. I mean, you can't fire Mahmoud Abbas, the president, even though at 88, he's in the 19th year of a 4-year term. The Palestinian Authority is autocratic, corrupt, and feckless. It controls no more than 40% of the West Bank. It has zero credibility in the Palestinian street, while Hamas, at least in the West Bank, support since October 7 has tripled. I just think there are a lot of other players here, John, that we have to consider. Number one, Hamas, for example. I think Hamas has every intention of surviving this war with Israel. And I think they may actually acquiesce in the formation of a technocratic government to govern Gaza because they know that such a government would be absolutely hostage, no pun intended, to their persuasions, their co-optation, and to their intimidation. So I think, I guess the central question is, can you actually imagine a credible Palestinian governance of Gaza, even assuming the Israelis will withdraw, that would be able to maintain security, good governance, in order to prevent the emergence of Hamas in some other form? And I think that question remains far from certain. Clearly, local administrators, clans, family heads in Gaza, they won't be able to do it. And the fact is, Hamas still retains a good deal of popularity, even in Gaza, after the sort of destruction of civilian infrastructure, the exponential loss of Palestinian life, which is a direct result, frankly, of Hamas's October 7 terror.
Right. So enormous question over whether a technocratic Palestinian authority could function and whether it would have any kind of credibility among the Palestinian popularity. And meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu is saying he will invade Rafah with or without a hostage deal, that really thumbs his nose at the White House, doesn't it?
Well, it's getting to be standard operating procedure. And frankly, the Biden administration, because it needs Mr. Netanyahu's assent for an Israel-Hamas prisoner exchange, at least during this first phase. And frankly, John, I think there's a higher possibility now than at any time since mid-November during the last exchange that you could actually get a hostage for prisoner exchange.
Yeah.
So the administration is not going to declare figurative wars, figuratively speaking, against the Israeli prime minister when he still holds the key to U.S. policy with respect to Gaza. Without an Israel-Hamas prisoner exchange, you don't get de-escalation, you don't get extended calm, you don't get a surge of humanitarian assistance. And administration can't even begin to go on to their broader aims, which is to still propose an Israeli-Saudi normalization agreement in exchange for Israeli acceptance of statehood.
Right, to try to explain this to us, Aaron, if you can. Would Hamas contemplate handing over hostages if it was simply the prelude to the invasion of Rafah? And for that matter, does Hamas care about that? Are they looking for a reaction against an invasion which they might think is politically useful?
I think Hamas has gotten an enormous amount of mileage out of the destruction that the Israelis have wreaked upon the civilian population of Gaza, up to a point. The Israelis have done tremendous damage, at least to believe their own accounts and even American intelligence accounts. Anywhere from 8,000 to 10,000 Palestinian fighters has been killed, and as an organized military force in northern central Gaza, Hamas is not what it used to be. You've got to figure Yahya Sinwar, the military of Hamas, planner of October 7, is sitting somewhere meters below ground in a tunnel below Khan Yunis or Rafah. He can't do a whole lot of governing from down there. And eventually, Hamas may believe that the Israelis will, in fact, identify where the senior leadership is. They may well be in Rafah. So I think military pressure has, in fact, had some impact, but I cannot conceive of a ground campaign with 1 million Palestinians, population density, maybe 100,000 humans per square mile
Yes.
in a tiny enclave in Rafah by the Israelis that wouldn't do catastrophic damage and an exponential rise of Palestinian deaths.
Yes.
And Israelis have to move 1 million people out into safe zones, which don't have potable water, medical facilities, or shelter. The whole thing now seems a little bit unimaginable, but then so did what the Israelis, how the Israelis responded post October 7th.
Yes. I mean, we heard from Benjamin Netanyahu over the weekend. He was saying that victory was pretty much at hand. He said he would expect to see victory within the space of weeks, not months, but weeks. What do you make of that?
Well, look, I'll judge the Israelis by the public articulation of their objectives, military objectives. Number one was to destroy Hamas as a military organization above and below ground. Number two was to kill the senior leadership. Number three was to free all of the hostages. And number four, unstated but clearly inferred from the top three, was to end Hamas's sovereignty.
Yes.
Their very capacity to influence and govern what happens in Gaza politically and economically. Frankly, I don't see any of those goals being fulfilled, to use the prime minister's words, totally.
Yes, and you have to wonder, does Benjamin Netanyahu want a quick victory? I mean, he is under enormous pressure. He's not popular. He's got criminal cases hanging over his head, and the conflict is a means of staving off those pressures. Does he want a weeks-long victory?
And he knows that the minute the war downshifts, the minute you get a fundamental change in the character and nature of the Israeli ground campaign in Gaza, domestic internal attention is going to turn to political accountability. And while there's no readily identifiable means right now to replace the prime minister, you can't have a constructive no confidence vote, and members of his own coalition are not going to desert him, at least the extremists won't. Yeah, political reckoning is coming. The real question, I think, only remains how long is it going to take?
Aaron David Miller, it is always very good and very helpful to get your analysis and your thoughts. Aaron David Miller, former Middle East negotiator at the US State Department.